All right, welcome back, friends, to another great episode here on Learn or Be Learned. Today's guest is Sam Obletz. He is an entrepreneur who's making headways in innovation, and he is here today to share some wisdom about his mindset and how he came up with the idea for his business. And I'm so excited to have him on. So, Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shiva. Very excited to chat.
Likewise. So, before we jump into any ideas here, can you let the audience in on a little bit of your backstory and what you did before the project you're working on now and a little bit about the project?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Oregon. From my earliest memories, spent a lot of time outdoors, and it's still my sanctuary where I try to go to recharge when I'm stressed out, and love to expand on that at some point. But
Yeah.
I think that,
Isn't the weather very rainy often in
yeah.
Oregon, Portland?
So we say that, there are 365 days in the year, and maybe 60 of them are without rain in Portland, Oregon. Um, but it makes the flowers bloom brilliantly. It makes you appreciate the sunny days much more.
Right.
There are trade-offs, but I love it here. And my wife and I moved back here um, 3 years ago, so we're
Mhm.
back here in Portland now. Um, but what a place to grow up! I mean, parks, endless forests.
Right.
It was fantastic, and I kind of grew up traveling. Was fortunate to follow my parents around the world as they competed internationally in athletics. My mom was a incredible Ironman triathlete and swimmer, national champion swimmer, and my dad was very competitive in running, um, and so obviously they were both working full time, but found ways to
Right.
expose us to different cultures around the world. And I was able to have two incredible role models who I
Mhm.
still look up to in every possible sense of the word role model, um, because they embodied to me the sort of grit, tenacity, hard work, perseverance, discipline that I try to I guess channel every day that I can. So that was my childhood, which was really wonderful. A younger brother who I have tremendous admiration for. We've gotten a lot closer in recent years. We were 3 years apart, so there's definitely this competitive dynamic that a lot of siblings probably feel. And post
Right.
college, we've been able to connect a lot more closely, which has been one of the great joys of my adulthood, candidly. Um, After leaving the Pacific Northwest and the rain behind, I went out to the East Coast, went to school and did a degree in political science. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to explore kind of the intersection of politics, the economy. I ended up working in finance and investing for 5 years in New York City, which was difficult, but I would say formative, and was fortunate to work on some incredible projects and find great mentors and relationships that have propelled me forward. And hopefully, I, in some small way, have returned, um, the favor in building those relationships with those mentors. So I spent 5 years in investing at Goldman. I then
Right.
wanted to go start a business of my own, and we can talk about kind of the inception there. But it's so important for me as a learning that you start something risky or difficult with someone that gives you energy and someone that you trust. And so I knew that there's
Mhm.
only one person in the world at the time who I would want to embark on this journey with. He was in grad school. So I said, I'm going to go to grad school, go meet up with him, convince him to start something with me. And now, 3 years later, from the time that we started Claim, our project together, we're still going strong.
Right. So you said somebody that you trust and can look towards, right? Is that the same person, or
Yeah,
is there
same person.
multiple support systems?
Yeah, no, same person. So
Okay.
we walked into our freshman year dorm room, um, made eye contact, and then became fast friends. Literally, it was super cool. And like if you
Right.
meet up with a roommate, whether you're in college or post college, it can either be great or it can be allergic.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
like
yeah.
very 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 infrequently is it somewhere in between. You're like, my roommate's okay. It's like, yeah, we're ride or die, or we hit each other.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's like rolling the dice.
yeah. So we connected on a fundamental level with one another, completely values aligned, built this really strong foundation of trust together. And by the way, he's absolutely brilliant.
Hmm.
And so I was like, I really just need to go. If we're going to do, we're going to build something, we need to do it together. I took a lot of
Right.
inspiration from that, from my dad, who started his own business as well, a small business. And he did so with his best friend in 1982, I want to say.
Hmm.
So definitely, it's a high risk, high reward thing to build something risky with a close friend. But at least in this moment, it's been fantastic, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Right. Just a couple clarification questions. Earlier, you mentioned your sibling. Did you mention you were the older brother or the
Yeah,
younger?
older.
Older of 3 years. Okay. And then with your dad, you said you had inspiration from him starting a business. What exactly was that in?
Yeah, so he worked for the city of Portland out here for a long
Mhm.
time in public policy, urban planning. And so he ended up starting a business that did project management and real estate development, but with a focus on the urban core and on revitalization. So he brought
Gotcha.
a lot of the mass transit to Portland and Seattle, things like light rail, the Portland and Seattle streetcar, really
Hmm.
trying to make the city more livable in a way and focus on affordability rather
Hmm.
than sprawl and suburban development.
Then he must have really saw some growth, huh? The
Yeah,
city over time.
yeah, totally.
S- So, I'm curious now because I'm curious on your opinion here. Do you think entrepreneurship it's almost like it's in your blood type thing? Do you think anybody can really do it? What's your because it takes a certain kind of mindset to be able to, like you said, high risk, high reward type field,
Yeah.
right? So what do you think? Do you think some people just either have that ability to take high risks, or do you think it's something that you can learn?
I think it can absolutely be learned. I think it'd be foolish to say that, you're born with it or you're not. I think some people are more predisposed to it than others. And I
Yeah.
think that some people get energy from it more than others. I mean, if you took I don't know, like a stock trader or a gambler, their
Hmm.
brain chemistry is going to be very different than someone who doesn't enjoy that sort of risk. Um,
Right.
to me, it's like if you do not have um, I would say like the native predisposition to entrepreneurship and the highs and lows and everything that entails, it might be more difficult for you to stomach some of the uncertainty. But my own experience is if you can surround yourself with, a great sounding board, a great, board of directors, however you want to analogize it,
Hmm.
you can absolutely do it.
Right. So now you when did you realize that you wanted to do entrepreneurship, or was it more the inception of the idea got you there first, or were you seeking to want to do something like this already?
Yeah, I do think it's been a core part of my own story. So my first two kind of entrepreneurial ventures were when I was in middle school.
Hmm.
One was I built a computer integration company with a close friend of mine in middle school. I think we were 11 years old. Called
Oh
it
wow.
Hailstorm Computers. So an ode to the weather out here.
Right.
And we didn't sell that many, but we put together these computers from Newegg parts and we advertised them on Craigslist. And it was a great experience to incorporate a company and think about marketing and think about unit economics and profit margins and build something end to end, and obviously learn a lot about computers along the way, which has always been a deep source of fascination for me. And then the next company that I started was a freelance web design company the next year. And so
Hmm.
just went out and all these marketplaces have developed now, Fiverr, Upwork, etc. But the earliest
Right.
versions of those, hey, I'm going to help a t-shirt company put up their storefront or help a blogger build their website.
Right.
And neither of them knew in those two examples that they were working with a 11-year-old or a 12-year-old, but it didn't matter because I would try to deliver good work product on time and on budget.
Hmm.
And for me, it really built this deep love for design. So I learned Photoshop, Illustrator, all those goods, got to exercise the kind of creative side. And I've taken that forward to where I do all the design now for our company, which has been fantastic. So I would say it was those first two experiences. And from the beginning, I've tried to want to build something. I think
Yeah.
what I wanted to build, the arc of how I wanted to build it, and who I wanted to build it with has absolutely changed over time.
Right. So then I guess this kind of segues us into the inception of your company now, right? Claim and what you did, which is, from what I understand, it's a very interesting concept. And I'm very curious, what's the backstory there and what was that journey like?
Yeah, I would say, as opposed to some founding stories where the founder has either a point in time epiphany or accumulates deep subject matter expertise over 1 to 2 years in a job and says, this is a pain point I felt deeply. I want to go solve this specific pain point. For me, Claim has been an amalgamation of my own life experiences and the life experiences of my co-founder, which have kind of led us to the point where we're building what we wish we would have had in a way at different points in our
Hmm.
lives. So the first example is I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I'd saved up my allowance from mowing the lawn, enough to walk down to the restaurant in our neighborhood, and I bought a Huckleberry milkshake for my friend Max, who lived next door, and myself. And it was the first time I'd ever bought something, and it sticks with me so much. Not only because it's like, wow, I earned this, I'm participating in the economy, but also that Max and I had this great experience together. And unfortunately, Max and I lost touch, but I'd love to reach back out to him and hear if he remembers this too, because it was
Right.
so it was formative for me, because we're drinking our milkshakes together and felt really good about it. And so that was one of the first pieces of the puzzle to us of, wow, doing things with friends is amazing. Having new experiences with friends is powerful. Having new experiences while building a relationship with a brand itself, because that brand can say so much about you. You hear all these phrases, put your money where your mouth is, or vote for your wallet. The choices that we make as consumers are extensions of ourselves. And that's why you have people love certain brands. It's because it says something about them, about their virtues or sometimes vices. Um,
Right.
but my point is that Claim today, our mission is to create easy and affordable memories for consumers, and that first kind of glimmer, that first memory, directly informs what we're doing today. The other key learnings that we kind of accumulated along the way are, one, we believe, I believe that social media is toxic. I never got an Instagram for that reason. I felt like, as somebody with an addictive personality, it wouldn't be useful to me. Um,
Right.
and you see the mental health impact that it's having on an entire generation now. It's pretty staggering.
Hmm.
And so we wanted to kind of reinvent what online and digital communication between friends looked like. That was kind of point two. And then we wanted that interaction itself to feel more authentic. I would much rather, Shiva, give you something that says something about you, your favorite coffee order, for example, than send you a Venmo. Um, it sounds silly, but like, that's the deeper human connection here. And so the more that we can build that sort of authenticity into a digital interaction, that's super powerful. And so you have that sort of consumer side picture that I just painted around trying to create opportunities for people to have experiences together while participating in the economy, with the very real need among marketers right now, any marketer who's trying to reach consumers. That's been a really difficult landscape in the past few years. And so that's kind of the hair on fire problem that Claim solves for both sides is, we allow you to get rewarded and save money when you try new things with friends. But on the marketer side, we give you this really authentic and attributable way to access young consumers and build relationships with young consumers that should last a very long time. And that's the sort
Hmm.
of two-sided marketplace that Claim has become.
Can you give us an example of what that looks like with a certain customer
Yeah.
clientele relationship?
Yeah. So Claim is meant for college students right now.
Okay.
That's our key demographic. And the way that we approach a college student is how I would have approached myself, how 10, 11, 12 years ago, which is, I wasn't necessarily broke, but I was definitely discerning with where I spent my money. I
Hmm.
definitely had a love-hate relationship more on the hate side with social media.
Hmm.
I appreciated a good deal, but more than anything, I loved an excuse to go do things and deepen my relationships with others. And so that's what we do with Claim. And the way that Claim works is it's a social app on your phone. You get a ping once a week when we do a drop. And that drop is a macro moment that we're creating for consumers. So it's like HQ Trivia or Be
Hmm.
Real, or maybe when you watch Friends with, on Thursday nights back in the day and you talked about it on Friday morning. I mean, the biggest version of it is like the Super Bowl, right? But we're
Hmm.
creating these sort of weekly, hyper localized moments for colleges kids. And
Hmm.
that becomes a bright spot in people's weeks. People look forward to these drops. When you get a drop, you kind of unwrap your brand for the week that the algorithm has chosen for you.
Hmm.
And then you see people on, Discord, on WhatsApp, on GroupMe, they're comparing what they got actively and figuring out what they're going to go do together the next
Hmm.
day, whether it's in person or, online. And that's the sort of
Right.
mechanism that brings people to the app. It creates um, joy, it creates delight for them during the week, and it's a win-win because brands now have an opportunity to win new customers. And the kind of flippant my flippant description of it is we've been able to create an experience that is um, valuable enough to consumers that they are excited to see an ad every week. And
Right.
if we can do that, like that's kind of the holy grail. Is I heard on one of your last conversations you were talking about kind of transitive social proof and embedded social proof as
Hmm.
a concept, which I think is super interesting. But um, if if a user claims student sees that their friend has shopped somewhere, they're more likely to try it themselves and bring their friend along, and that's the holy grail for us.
Right, because oftentimes as humans, as people, we feel a sense of togetherness when we're able to do something that somebody else also did, right?
Yep.
The fact that you saw me shop at this place or repeatedly shop at some place, you might give it a shot. If you like it too, that builds rapport on another something that you both have an interest in, which I think as humans we like to find people with similar interests, right? So I think that's such an interesting concept on the social side and the psychology side of consumerism. Would you classify this, at least on the consumer side, would you classify this as a community based uh, approach?
Yeah,
Is the essence here building communities?
I would, and we build into existing communities, but we allow people to create sub communities within the community. So an example would be um, if you're a student at UT Austin, for example, UT Austin is your kind of larger community, and you're seeing actively where people are shopping, where they're trading, where they're going together on the UT Austin feed. Which, when you think about kind of concentric circles moving outwards, it is interesting to see where people like you on your campus are making choices and making plans together. But the
Hmm.
innermost circle is you and your closest friends. And so that sort of inner community is what we allow people to curate as well.
Right. So, do you see this in the larger picture, right? Because you're starting with college students. How do you see this going at more of a city level or, Portland, for example,
Yeah.
right? How do you see this growing outside of college?
Yeah. And maybe just to explain our thesis on starting with college. Um, One, as an entrepreneur, it doesn't matter who you're serving. I believe that you have to start with um, a demographic that you deeply understand. That could be a CTO at a small business, and you deeply understand
Hmm.
what that CTO is like, or it could be a broad consumer base. But um, I think it would be a mistake if we said, Shiva, that we want to um, serve 16 through 65-year-olds living across the country. So that sort
Right.
of deep focus is useful. The reason that colleges make sense to us is because we have these existing communities, these sort of dense social networks that allows us to learn faster. And it also allows us to take culture, which is being defined every single minute of every single day on these college campuses, and essentially extrapolate that outwards when our students graduate, when kind of the 23 through 28-year-olds see what all the college kids are doing and adopt their
Right.
mannerisms and brand preferences and the like. So that's the sort of like ripeness to starting at colleges. The difficulty with colleges is, one, like I was at the time, don't have a lot of discretionary money to spend.
Right.
And two, they're highly seasonal. So this summer, college kids have either graduated, hopefully, or they're interning in major cities around the country. And so to get ahead of that, we allow you to choose your city during the summer. So if you
Hmm.
went to UT Austin and you're now living in Washington, D.C., you can say, I'm in D.C. now, or I'm interning in L.A. And that test allows us to at least test how students respond to claim outside of a campus context. I think
Hmm.
the city-based approach, which is exactly what you're describing, is where we go next. The natural time for us to do that is probably at the end of either the winter semester, this calendar year, or the spring semester. And that's when we can
Right.
really open this up to more and more people. For now, you have to have a college email address at one of the colleges where we've launched, again, with a view
Hmm.
towards deeply understanding, empathizing with, and building for a demographic that we understand.
Hmm. This reminds me a lot of Bumble's approach to going past dating and including friends and business. I don't know exactly how the app works, but it was something about you could do like search for friends that are you're looking for business friends or you're looking for just friends in general. And obviously that's a city-based approach as well, right? Because it's in your vicinity, which I think is interesting because let's say even you're going to a whole new city for a week or a month, right? You don't know anybody. So I think things like Claim or these types of apps that kind of give you access to people's interests in the city is would be very helpful to
Mm-hmm.
meet people.
And going back to the social proof point, when we first launched, we were in Boston, and we still to this day we say at the bottom of the screen, made with love in Boston. And obviously that doesn't carry as much weight if I live in Portland, but like that sense of kind of identity and community is really important to us,
Hmm.
and it carries through other parts of our messaging. We will say, hey, 7,000 students from your college have already joined. Um,
Yeah.
you're not the first. Come join the community, which is really important as well.
Oh, 100%. I think that also piques interest if they see people kind of already doing it. It's it's like that psychology experiment where somebody starts some music and it's just one person dancing and then you see one person join and the next thing you know there's just a ton of people joining in a group and then once the group gets big enough it's socially acceptable so a
Yeah,
ton of people join, right? I think it's that snowball effect too, like you're saying.
totally.
So then I would assume the hardest part of that hurdle then is getting the first person or getting the first person in a university specifically, right? So how do you kind of tackle that side,
Yeah, I mean,
getting
you mentioned
people interested?
Bumble. There's some great prior art to draw on here in terms of successfully building a playbook. We also look at Be Real as an example. Um, and the way we do it is we'll find one or two ambassadors on a college campus, and we really try to
Hmm.
learn from that ambassador about what the student experience is like. Where do people go out together? What brands do people shop at? Where do people eat? Help us understand the student group dynamic on campus. And then ambassador becomes our person literally on the ground,
Right.
to help us build early partnerships with a few seed organizations on campus. At Harvard,
Hmm.
for example, it was a fantastic woman named Namira who ran the Automotive Society there and now works with Claim full time this summer. But once we understand a campus, we then can figure out how to best approach the first few weeks, get to several thousand students, and then the machine kind of moves on its own because we reached that tipping point that we were just talking about. And so for
Hmm.
us, the question becomes, you're exactly right. The hardest part is the early landing on a campus,
Hmm.
figuring out how we can get the first kind of few thousand users, and then where do we want to go from there, and how does the campus reach a steady state on its own?
What was your incentives for the ambassadors? Just curious.
Yeah, we've tested a few different models. We'll pay our ambassadors now on discrete tasks, and then some
Right.
ambassadors, like Jared at University of Maryland go so far above and beyond that we asked them to come on as interns,
Right.
for a prolonged period of time. But one of the things that Bumble and other apps have learned is if you give very direct guidance to young people, they will do their best to check those boxes off as quickly as possible. And so we'll
Hmm.
pay a couple $100 for 6 or 7 things that they can accomplish within a few weeks.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Now, I saw from what I understood and researched is you took inspiration from this idea also from the peaked interest in Web3,
Hmm.
correct? When what I assume is what the whole NFT craze that was going on,
Yeah, what a time.
maybe, yeah, like what, maybe 1 or 2 years ago. I mean, people were paying crazy money for a digital anything, really. So I think that's pretty an interesting side psychologically, right? Because we want to own things. It's this innate need for gathering resources, and I guess in this today's day and age, even digital resources
Hmm.
still kind of activates that certain part of our brain as if we had physical resources. So is that where an inspiration came from in this idea too?
Yeah, definitely. And um, the gold rush, whatever, the
Right.
trickery, however you want to describe kind of the latest Web3 cycle, what the space did get right are some really interesting consumer insights. So you mentioned the kind of desire to own something. Um,
Hmm.
Here, private property um, in the physical world defines so much of how we interact with one another and with institutions and systems. Wouldn't it be equally as transformative, if not more, if private property truly existed online as well? So I think that's part of what captivated so many people, including myself, about digital ownership. What Web3 I think got right are what we've continued to have in claim, which are um, airdrops in Web3 terms,
Yeah.
um, were these sort of moments that people created where you make things appear out of thin air and it's a moment of delight. And we have the exact
Hmm.
same thing once a week in our own, kind of way with drops. Web3, the idea was you could exchange these digital goods, NFTs, on a marketplace, for example.
Hmm.
And with Claim, you can trade your brands. Um,
Yeah.
and lastly, their staying power notwithstanding, in Web3, there were all these Discord communities around projects and the like, and we still have communities built into what we do in Claim. So I don't think that Web3 got everything wrong. In fact, I think Web3 really deeply understood, or at least the leaders in Web3 deeply understood the consumer psychology aspect of what they were building. The two problems were, one, way too much technical barrier to entry, and two, other than making money in financial speculation, in that cycle, there were really no consumer use cases that um, rose to the surface. And that's the
Yeah.
undoing of that latest cycle.
Right. Right. I think that's really interesting because there's always hesitancy for things that are always new and changing, right? We're creatures of habit. So just like the computer, just like the internet, probably skeptics would say, well, why would anybody want to own anything digital? That makes no sense. But we can already see that at small scale, and arguably it's not so small scale today with domains, right? People, back then, if you bought a domain, it'd be kind of weird. But today, domains are so valuable because the internet is so powerful. Having something quick and easy to, search in Google or just, claim.com or even a good example is Tesla. When Tesla wanted just Tesla.com, it was already taken. So they
Yeah.
kind of had to, negotiate and kind of get that
Or
domain name
Elon,
back.
reserved X.com forever ago for his everything company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now here
Right.
we
So
are.
like,
But
right. And people can buy, their names, domain and whatnot. So I think there's so much that we don't see at that kind of scale that we're like, okay, well, there's already a resemblance of this already where people do have digital ownership. Um, so I think that's interesting because do you think we're moving towards more and more digital ownership?
yeah, I would be shocked if we weren't 5 or 10 years from now. I just think it'll have very little of the vestiges of the last Web3 craze. I think it'll feel
Well,
good.
right.
Yeah.
Well, also if you see it right, naturally we also want to sometimes declutter the things we have. And we've also moved towards more of a subscription based model for almost everything.
Mm.
So we don't even own so many things anymore, right? We used to own CDs and DVDs and all these things, and now it's all subscription streaming services. So do you see us actually owning things or maybe owning the right to use things?
It's a great question. I think maybe the earliest versions of ownership, the most powerful versions of ownership we will probably see are around things you've earned.
Mm,
For example, I think one of the earliest um, examples that people really tried to promote in Web3 was, what if you could take your Delta medallion status and you
mhm,
could rent it out, or you could sell it, or also you could
hmm,
throw it in the waste bin. Like anything you could do with a physical item, could you do with something you've earned online? And that, that thing you've earned online becomes an asset in the same way that, my coffee cup is an asset that's worth about the same as my Delta status because I don't have any, right? You get the
Right.
point. I could
Yeah.
see us going there for sure. But one thing that you kind of piqued in my mind, Shiva, is that um, you know the earliest waves of various technological evolution are met with so much skepticism. You kind of have the early adopters who are willing to experiment and go all in, and then you have the chasm between the early adopters and the early majority. And the problem with Web3
Mhm,
is it was and still is stuck in that chasm where the early majority haven't found a reason other than Bitcoin and maybe some asset diversification, store value, to cross the chasm and really have that sort of technology adopted. And frankly, same goes for starting a company. And
mhm.
this was a reflection that I had during a fundraising process where you get a lot of rejection. And what
Right.
a close friend of mine helped me understand is, hey, look, um, if the idea were obvious, it would already be built. If you didn't have skeptics, it would already be built. And so I do think, again, whether you're starting a small business, whether you're starting a tech company, you do have to have this irrationality and optimism, just as the early Web3 kind of developers did, that what you're doing might be a little crazy, but you have confidence that what you're doing could be massive and it gives you joy and energy. And so long as you can
Yeah.
keep that in the forefront of your mind, then you can kind of ride the ride out the storm,
Yeah.
and you can take rejection for what it is, which is just a data point.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at what is considered normal would just be status quo. So then in order to tip the scale, you would have to do something radical on either end, right? So technically you would be called crazy or you would be thinking irrationally, but that's kind of how you make strides in different fields is without that then there is no movement. It's just the constant status quo.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean
look,
we're seeing that in movies.
Airbnb, like who would have thought that we'd be sleeping in strangers' homes? Uber, like at the
Right.
beginning, people were like, "I'm going to get into a stranger's car."
Yeah.
So there's so many examples of this, and there are many with AI that we're just starting to kind of understand now, that are going to dramatically change the way that we interact with one another and we interact with systems in our society.
Hmm. Now that's always an interesting topic. Where do you think we're headed with that, especially in relations to what you do and how that might help building communities? What do you think?
Yeah. Um, we use, the latest wave of LLMs to support our own kind of velocity. So we use it in our code base.
You
Um,
said LLMs?
yeah, large language models. So things like
Gotcha.
GPT,
Yeah, right,
GPT-4,
right.
for example. Um, and so, I mean, it's incredible. You essentially have this god in a box in a way. I'll say that, flippantly, but um, and so we use it to support our own work now. We're just starting to experiment with what other generative or creative roles it can play for us in our community building. For example, when we have a place for people to interact online how might an AI support building that
Right.
community actively through content generation, moderation, etc. How can we use AI to understand our consumer even better, which is something an active project for us right now. Feed all these data points. How can we predict what you'll love, which we're
Hmm.
actively working on, and we have really interesting kind of first results on. Um,
Yeah.
but I think people love on Twitter or otherwise to talk about people's jobs getting replaced. You see a headline of that every single day, and there is merit
Hmm.
to that. But the reality is, in these early kind of cycles, no one knows. No one knows.
Yeah. I mean,
Radiologists with early machine learning were being told in the 1950s that they'd be out of a job. Um, and here we are today. Obviously, image recognition augments some work that radiologists do, but radiologists are still in business.
hmm.
Um, and I do think that there will be a lot of change in our labor force. Prompt engineering is going to become its own job class. And I do think that, you know, automation will disproportionately affect certain parts of our society. Things like marketing, for example, which I spend all of my time in, will be deeply affected by this tooling. Um, but it doesn't mean that, flip a switch overnight and suddenly we're all beholden to some omniscient, omnipotent,
Right.
AI.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting because I try to think about where we're headed with this technology because it's so powerful. It almost it almost hurts my head to think about there's so many endless possibilities of where this could go and the use cases, and it's almost like Doctor Strange in the future, right? Where you could where I could see this even going is it's almost like Doctor Strange in the sense that it's like, okay, I have this problem, what are give me all the like possible solutions and what works, and it's like, okay, I went through 10,000 models and ideas and these are the only two that work, right? So it's like the fact that I couldn't even do that. I mean, it would take us years to just sit down and think about every possible example and idea, and it's so mind-boggling to the point where it's like you said, it's almost impossible to dictate where this is gonna shift society. But what it does resemble is almost as if we're at the period of time when the printing press was made,
Yeah.
right? And being there and being like, well, where is this going to shift our society to? Well, people then most definitely couldn't have predicted that we would create computers and iPhones and all sorts of things, the internet, right? So it's so interesting because I think it's so radical that you almost have to ride the wave and kind of learn as you go.
Yeah. We're living we're living in history right now, which is really cool.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I agree. We talk about in anthropology different waves of evolution for humans, and obviously fire was a big tool, printing press was huge, industrial revolution, agricultural revolution, and I honestly think we're in the next one, right? The technological revolution, and we're going to see so many changes over the course of our lives and over the course of history as we're making it, which I think a lot of good and bad things will come to light of what's going on.
And even in
Um,
the last, call it 25 years, 30 years, right? Within the internet revolution, there have been several chapters that are in themselves very interesting. Web 1.0
mhm.
was kind of a modernization of the printing press, right? You had people
Yeah,
able to, on a static web page, broadcast and distribute their thoughts about the world. Web 2 was social media and mobile, right? So now you have
right.
communities forming online. We'll put aside like what Web 3 will become, but digital ownership could be an interesting concept in kind of this latest chapter, but AI and these large language models certainly are, because it just changes so much of where the intellect is concentrated.
Mhm.
With Web 1.0, 2.0 AI, um, it does take some of the smartest people in our society and accelerate these own waves in really tremendous ways. And when you take the smartest people in our society and you couple them with compute power, which is growing incredibly fast, with we'll see if it's doubling at the same rate, but exponentially, effectively, it creates a really ripe an interesting time to be alive.
hmm And honestly, this is my opinion, but I think, right, with where we're headed with each revolution through human history, we see pros and cons, of course. But I think a con that's kind of developed over time with technology is the idea of mental health,
Mm.
right? A lot of fake personas on the internet and comparison, the natural tendency to compare yourself as a human being, and just the isolation factor like we saw through the pandemic. So I think we could see even a sense of stronger community through Web3. And that's truly what's right, like a collective community where we're moving towards creativity and natural expression, right? With AI, make me this using this idea and that. It's like we kind of use different AI tools to create our vision. What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
I think being able to blend your imagination with the way that you portray yourself to the world is super interesting. There's a company called Can of Soup, for example, and I had a chance to spend some time with the founders. And what it does is it takes an image generation model, and it learns what your face looks like, and it
hmm
overlays that with your social network. And so now you can create images of yourself and your friends in
Yeah.
whatever your imagination can, generate. Um,
hmm
and it creates little sub communities within that. And so I think that's an example of exactly what you're saying is like, not only can I show my world my authentic self, but I can show my world where my imagination lives too,
Yeah.
which is super cool.
Yeah. And I'm interested in this idea of authenticity because part of me thinks that there's less authenticity. For example, Ready Player One, right? So people join this new virtual reality, but you can make yourself look like anything, right? So you're not really even looking like yourself anymore. You could make yourself this 10-foot robotic giant, or you could have 6 arms, right? So, but then the other side of that coin is, well, maybe that is more authentic
Yeah.
because that's your imagination portraying itself to its truest form, right? You get to express yourself how you would want it to, right? So I don't know. What do you think about this idea of authenticity over time using AI, Web3, and all that?
Yeah. I I hear you on the ability to kind of show the world who you are, however that may be. Um,
hmm
what I also believe in, though, is that we can't have that come at the expense of real world physical interaction. Um,
Right.
we saw during the pandemic that children's educational outcomes were impacted massively. Um, we often hear like,
hmm
oh, he's a COVID kid or something. That's because for 1 to 3 years, that kid didn't have a chance to meet up in person with other kids, and it kind of can
right.
stunt your social growth.
hmm
And so forever there's been this dystopian notion that we're all going to strap on Oculus VR headsets and sit in a room in a dark corner, and the only life we live is in the metaverse or whatever. Um,
hmm
and I do think that and part of what we're so motivated with Claim to do is create these true eye to eye physical um, ways for you to spend time and show your physical world authentic self to friends and be accepted for who you are and what drives you. Because
Yeah.
as opposed to showing on Instagram that I went to a party or I'm traveling in the Maldives or something,
hmm
which you can fake, especially with AI now.
hmm
It's harder for you to fake where you're voting with your wallet, for
hmm
example. It's hard to fake a Venmo transaction. And so we think that
right.
on Claim, where you're choosing to spend your money, the brands that you're trying, who you're doing it with, that is part of building your authentic self in a way.
Hmm. That's very interesting. I like that. I mean, yeah, like we said, I think just the idea of a community is going to be even more important, and the need for it, I think, now more than ever. Because even when we saw with remote work, although people tended to be more productive, also the idea of loneliness kind of increased, isolation. And but I think there's always a way to circumnavigate that, right? You can join a fitness community of
Mm-hmm.
your kind. And where I see this even going in the future is, right, it's a tool like anything else. It's how you use it is whether it's going to be good or bad, right? So you could create a community where we all put on the VR and we're all sitting in the same room, which is almost like in real life, but it could, for those that either can't, afford the full trip to, eat out somewhere else every day, buy a hotel, flight, all that expenses, they just have to buy a ticket and put on their VR and boom,
Yeah,
they get to experience it as real as they probably could, especially with future tech and how it's improved. I think there's a lot of great things that can come out of it like that, right? Building conferences like that.
totally. I agree.
Hmm.
And we saw that even pre VR and everything,
Hmm.
flash mobs and silent raves and all of this stuff. You can get
Yeah.
together with friends with not a lot of technology, but groundbreaking technology in the arc of humanity, and do some really interesting things together.
Hmm. So, Sam, as you know, this show is called Learn or Be Learned. So, I love to ask my guests this final question, which is, what is one life lesson that either you learn from someone or you want the audience to learn from your own life that you'd like to share
Hmm.
today as a closing point?
Um, I love this. So, Learn or Be Learned is such an interesting framing because it's not mutually exclusive. I think in any
Hmm.
given moment, you can be learning and being learned from.
Yeah.
So I personally love that. A friend of mine told me recently when I was kind of going through a local low in the entrepreneurship journey. I say that because if you zoom out, the line isn't as haphazard as you think it is. And he helped me have
Right.
that perspective. And he said, when did your ancestors first come to the US? I said, well, 1917, 1918. I came from Latvia or Eastern Europe. He's actually my namesake, Samuel Obletz.
Hmm.
Um, landed at Ellis Island, had his name changed, and basically showed up with, probably a couple dollars in his pocket, a briefcase, and
Yeah.
that's it, and left his whole family behind. And um, he had to make a life for himself here, starting with nothing at a time where, we were in the middle of the 1918 flu, um,
Hmm.
where we don't have public
Yeah.
health, we don't have social services, we don't have all these things. 100 years ago, life was difficult, and understanding that and asking myself, what would my great grandpa Sam think now when he saw the opportunities that I have? And sure, um, might be having a tough day, and might be stressed, and might have gotten rejected, or there might be uncertainty. But look at where we live today, and the opportunities that uh, we can have, the healthy lives that I'm fortunate now to have, and how can we make the most of our time here? That sort of perspective was really edifying for me, and in that moment I learned from him how to broaden my own perspective on um, my own life and where I want to take it.
Hmm. I love that because for me, something that's really helped is sitting in the sense of gratitude when you start to hyperfixate or have anxiety about the future or the past or what's going on, but just to sit for a moment and say like, well, look how far you've come. Look how
Yeah,
grateful I am
and
for
look at the
everything that's going
sacrifices
on.
that your forebears have made, or the founding fathers of this country, right?
Hmm.
Like, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's kind of cliche, but I think it's important to bear that in mind and sit in gratitude, to your point.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, thank you so much for being on this show, and I really appreciate you spending some time and sharing your wisdom.
This is a lot of fun, and one of the more impactful conversations I've had recently, so thank you.